Hey, deserving listeners, this is part 3 in me reacting to the miniseries called Adolescence. Let's get back to it.
A red pill exploding. That's the same as the red pill. And then that's an 80-20 thing.
What's an 80-20 thing?
They're getting specifically into the manosphere, red pill universe. And the other thing I should say is that not all, but there's a pocket or a voice within the incel red pill manosphere community that is explicitly aggressive towards women. They will talk about things or share memes or recommend things or disclose things that they've done that are harmful to women as a way of getting back at the female race, so to speak, as a way of displaying their own masculinity, as a way of expressing their anger. So he's saying right now that he came across the red pill stuff, but he didn't like it. But it's also possible that in the process of him absorbing some of it, that there was a notion out there of just like, well, women deserve to be harmed in this way, or if they don't give it up, then you can hurt them, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I don't know, but I just thought I'd throw that out there. You know, the way I was talking about the red pill community earlier was one aspect of it, but this is another.
I do think they're right about that, though.
And lots of people liked her comments quite a lot.
Yeah, they thought it was funny.
And again, I don't know to what depth people want me to go into, but the 80-20 thing is ridiculous on so many different levels. Now, could you say that if you did research and showed a bunch of pictures or Tinder profiles to a bunch of heterosexual women, might it actually be shown in the data that 80% of women are attracted to 20, generally speaking, to 20% of the Tinder profiles? Sure. But that's probably a human thing, not a male or female thing. This is where the friend zone thing comes from. There's a lot of bullshit evolutionary psychology that gets thrown in here, which I want to get into, but for the sake of time won't.
All I did was... look at you.
Yeah, I think one of the story beats or elements of Jamie's psychology that the writers are trying to show us is that when he is real and authentic and vulnerable, then he defends himself in one of two ways, or maybe three. The first way was for him to just kind of evade and be silly and jokey. That was in the beginning. And then later we see him being aggressive and throwing the chair around. And then this third mode, which is, I don't know what you call it, the Andrew Tate in him.
Do you understand that Katie's gone and she can't come back?
I didn't do it.
That whatever claims you make as to her character,
I didn't mean
whatever
she was a bitch.
claims you make about her, she's gone.
I think what the storytellers are trying to depict right now is something that a forensic psychologist in this scenario would try to assess, which is he of sound mind and body, so to speak? Does he have the capacity to understand the consequences of his actions? Does he understand the difference between life and death? It would bolster the report to the courts if the forensic psychologist could include, I asked specifically about his knowledge or thoughts about the difference between life and death, and that Katie is dead and gone, and he indicated that he understood that difference. Whereas if he was delusional or he had some other sort of cognitive issue that would prevent him from understanding that difference, then that changes things, particularly for the courts, right? Because if he doesn't understand that difference, or he's delusional, or he has thoughts about this other world that she entered or something, that's better than this world. Like sometimes that'll happen, unfortunately, is someone will have a delusion. I want to be clear that people who suffer from psychosis and delusions don't have any greater likelihood of harming anyone, generally speaking, especially when they have proper support. But there are cases in which someone would be motivated by their delusions to kill someone or to attempt to kill someone. And it's very important that the court understand it, that the trier of fact, the jury or judge understands this, because it could determine the sentence, it could determine the type of sentence, what sort of facility do they go to. So I think that's what they're depicting here. It serves a dual purpose, which is some kind of story arc of, at the end of the meeting here, of let's get real. We're talking about a dead girl. Do you understand that? And it kind of has a element of mini justice, if you will, that he's now being forced to reckon with this.
That whoever did kill her, they extinguished the possibility of her future life.
I'm not dumb.
Do you understand that murder is a crime?
Yeah.
Do you understand that if you're found guilty of that crime, you'll be held in detention?
And right, these questions, or this, especially this final question, has to do with assessing his capacity to understand what he is on trial for. So when it comes to pleading insanity at the time of the crime, the two things that we're generally looking at are, what was their capacity to understand their actions at the moment of the crime, and what is their capacity of understanding the trial as they're going through the trial. Because if they don't understand what's happening, the way we think about a criminal justice trial, we tend to focus on trying to determine guilt versus innocence, right? But there are a lot of other aspects to it. One is that the individual, the question, the defendant, they have the right to comprehend what's happening and see what's happening and advocate for themselves through their attorney. And if they don't understand what's happening, then a critical component of justice is lost. And so there's not only the concern about being insane or not having the capacity to understand or to act in a rational manner at the time of the crime, but there's also the question as to, do they understand what they're even going through as they're going through the trial? So the questions that she's answering here are along those lines. There are more involved ways of assessing this, actually, because just asking this question is good, but there are a lot of vectors that we look at when we're trying to assess capacity for those two areas.
Any mental health services that are
No,
offered to you,
why?
I think you'll benefit from
No,
talking
no,
more
I
about.
won't.
Well, that's just what I think.
And then you come back. You see me?
Unfortunately, I'm needed elsewhere.
Right. So she is concluding by saying, because I think what we're hearing is that she has completed her assessment. She has all that she needs. And either because this was pre-designed to be the final meeting between the two of them, or she has all that she needs, so she doesn't need to meet with him for another time. And she's now informing him, and he's confused about that. I think because, I don't know if this is the story or what, but I think he thinks that she is a clinician that is providing talk therapy, that she's there to help him. But she's not there to help him. She's there to assess him.
Wait, it's just like fucking done, is it?
I hope
All
you
of
take
it.
what I said seriously. Thanks for your time. I'll ask Frank to come back.
One could argue, especially in the case of a minor, a 13-year-old, or I don't know if he's turned 14 by this point, but one could argue that it is questionable, potentially unethical, to lead a client on in this way, to not be explicit, to not be clear with him about her role and how limited it will be, because he clearly did not know this was what was going to happen, and it's hurting him. Even if he is convicted or he did commit this crime, that doesn't give us the right to harm people by misleading them in this way.
So it doesn't seem like a proper goodbye.
It is.
It doesn't seem like one.
Yeah, that's enough. Come on.
No, we haven't finished.
We have, thank you.
No,
Frank.
no. Can I ask you something? Do you like me?
I will say, this kid is a fantastic actor. So many times with actors this age, I'll give them some leeway because they're children that are trying to act, right? But this is, especially under the circumstances, this is all one shot, or maybe there's a couple edits in here, but even if it were 3 different edits that they're piecing together, it's still like 20 minutes of acting, and it's all centered around him, and he's doing all the heavy lifting here. He's doing all the emotion and the physical and the verbal and the emphasis and the memorization. Like, there's so much that he's doing. And also commend the director and the writer for giving him material to work with.
I was here as a professional, Jamie.
Don't you think like that then?
My job was to assess
'Cause I like you.
as a professional.
Not like that, not fancying you, just as a person.
Yeah, so this happens both in forensic assessments and therapy, that a client will ask us directly in various different demeanors and contexts as to whether or not we like them, or some other related question. Maybe it's more subtle, maybe it's more direct like this. And there are rules that people will claim that are in our field, that you can never answer a question like that, or you should always answer a question like that. And it's a case-by-case basis. It depends on the context. Whenever I would get these kind of questions from students, I would say, do what's helpful. And I would say that to so many questions that all I would have to say to my trainees would say, you know, the answer I'm going to have to that question, right? Now, that wasn't the end of the conversation. We would talk about especially if it was about a particular client that one of my trainees was working with, that it wasn't like I just dismissed everyone, like, just do what's helpful and get away from me. I said that to provide the foundation, that there are no rules to this, or if there is a rule, it's to be ethical and helpful. So to answer this question, she could potentially answer this, but she is in a forensic assessment role, so it could be argued, actually, if she were to answer this question, however she wanted to answer it, whether it would be truthful or a white lie or something, like, yeah, I like you, whatever. If that got around to the trier of fact, and especially to anyone that wanted to refute her report, they could point to that and question her professionalism, question her training, question her abilities, question her objectivity. So she cannot answer this question.
Don't you dare! Don't you dare!
Whoa, come on.
Don't you get the fuck off me! Don't you dare!
Hey!
Don't even like me a bit!
Jamie, come on, man, please.
And I think what we're learning about Jamie is that he really wants people to like him, maybe particularly women. I don't know. But yeah, it's an interesting way to end it.
Tell him I got him all right! Tell him I got him okay! Tell him I'm okay, please!
And I will say that this is very reminiscent of working with this sort of population. If you watched Honora, the movie, actually this was depicted pretty well. In fact, I would say excellently well, that the walls that go up and how consistent they are and how potentially self-destructive they are for the individual. When we put up walls, we need them because of things that we've been through, but those walls end up creating more reasons to have walls. And we're seeing a little bit of that. But this, I would work with a kid like this, 13, 14, and just grind away week after week, month after month, building rapport, getting them to trust me, helping them, as a therapist, not as a forensic psychologist, but as a psychotherapist. And I would be proving myself to them and advocating myself, advocating for them. I would be, doing what they want to do for half the session. With some of these kids, I'd say, okay, for the first half, we get to do whatever you want to do within reason. And for the second half, then we're going to do what I want to do, which is therapy stuff. And sometimes that would work out. Not all the time, but sometimes. Little did they know that I was doing a little bit of therapy even in the beginning, because you can literally watch. It was sometimes kids they like to watch YouTube videos. So you're watching YouTube videos that they like to watch. And there's just little things that you can have a conversation about. Anyway, so I would just grind away, and it would be like Sisyphus pushing that thing up the mountain. And then one thing would go wrong, or nothing would go wrong. They would just be having a bad day, and they would just turn on you. And it's just like, it's hard work. It's really, really hard work. And the whole time, you might absolutely know, because it's being told to you, it's being told to you in not so subtle ways, that this client doesn't even want to be in therapy with you. They didn't hire you. They're being forced to do it by their parents or the state or the foster parents or their teachers or something. And you are just absorbing all of this. It's really hard to cope with over time. And with my trainees, I try to help them with that and help them with their attitudes around this, because sometimes the support around this is not very great. Whereas when you're working with adults, at least in a typical private practice format, you're working with people who want to be in therapy. They're desperate to get to therapy. They wish they had more time with you, right? They're like, okay, I've been preparing. It's a much different vibe than this sort of thing. So this is depicting that pretty well. Even though this isn't psychotherapy, this is a forensic assessment. Yeah, makes sense. So at the end here, we're seeing her center herself again, take a break. I don't know what she's thinking, but she's probably just saying, okay, that was a lot. And she allows herself to cry a little bit. It's all normal. In fact, it's almost guaranteed in situations like this that there are going to be feelings, there's going to be distress, adrenaline, tears. And kudos to this actress as well. The way she is depicting the crying, and it looks like actual tears are forming. And maybe there is some reality to it, right? She's at the end of a grueling hour-long film shoot, right? It's probably a lot of genuineness to this to some extent. But the subtlety, one of the things that I learned about crying as a therapist and as a professor, it's very common in class for us, for me, for students, for my colleagues, my fellow professors, to cry about various different things. I learned that there's like thousands of different ways to cry. When I was younger, I would have thought, well, you're either crying or you're not, right? And of course, I'm sure you understand this, but when you're a connoisseur of crying individuals, you get a sense of the subtleties of different types of crying, different reasons, different provocations, different coping, different degrees of it. And she and the director and the writer, all that is involved in this little scene right here of her trying. I think what she's doing is, so here's what I interpret, is that she's allowing herself to feel, because it's the end. She's allowing some self-care. She's not like jumping up and running out the door. She's not shaming herself. She's not like, get over it. She's letting herself feel it. She's trying to relax at the same time, maybe just for her own adrenaline. Maybe people would interpret this as her trying to stop crying, but I don't know. It's hard to say. It could be that, but it could just be her allowing herself to cry, allowing herself to feel, allowing herself to decompress, taking care of herself. There's probably some thoughts in her mind that she's reassuring herself, I don't know, of just like, wow, that was hard. And also, this is important work, and I'm doing this for justice. I'm doing this not only for him, but I'm doing it for Katie. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up, but there's a subtlety. So what I'm saying is that I have learned over the years that there are so many different reasons and ways in which people cry. And this is a very specific depiction of a particular type of crying that you don't usually see in movies and TV. And I'm reminded about one of the many reasons why, although I'm trained as a forensic psychologist, I ultimately chose not to do that kind of work. Because for me, the reason why I entered psychology was to help people. And when you're doing forensic assessments, you could say you're indirectly helping people in a sense. You could say you're helping Katie or the family of the victim, or maybe even Jamie, I don't know, or you're helping the jury or the judge or the justice system or something. But I got into psychology because I wanted to work with individuals and groups, couples and families and group therapy contexts to, face-to-face directly help the person that I'm talking to. And with forensic assessments, that's not the goal. The goal is to gather information and write a report, and to be professional and to be prepared to be cross-examined. God bless the people that do this. It's very important work. And it pays a lot more than psychotherapy does, by the way. But I ultimately decided, there's a lot of other reasons. Another reason I'll just tell you was that I found the report writing to be very tedious. In some aspects, even the assessment. This was a bit of more excitement in terms of the assessment interview. But you can conduct testing that can take 8 hours total, where you're just administering these tests and then you're just sitting there watching them fill out a form. It's just, and I don't care how much I get paid. It's just, I don't know. It's tedious. And then writing the report, now she has to sit down in front of a computer and write all this out. And that can take hours and hours and hours. And then you've got to prepare to be cross-examined. You've got to memorize, 6 months from now, she might have to remember this report that she wrote. She might barely remember Jamie. She's got to refamiliarize herself, and then she's got to get all, amped up and ready to face the opposing attorney or the prosecutor or someone who's coming after her, and she's got to answer the questions well, and you're in this constant state of being attacked, and you have to be very firm. Even that was another element that I didn't like about forensic psychology, was that the way that I think, and the way that a lot of people like me think in my field, is that there's no way to know anything about psychology or motivation or behavior or personality. There's not hard science. There's some indirect, you could say, medium hard science, but it's not hard science like this is diamond and that is water, right? We don't have the ability to do that. We don't have constructs. We don't have measuring technologies to know any of those answers. And yet we're supposed to be very certain and very clear in our reports about what the findings were. And I was, in my work in this area, people would ask me questions and I'd be like, well, it kind of depends. I mean, here's my opinion, but it's just my opinion. That doesn't go over well when you're being hired by it. Attorneys don't want you to have nuance, typically. Sometimes they do, but you'll never get hired. Now, there is other work in forensic psychology that I did that didn't involve that necessitation of certainty, but the other work also was the tediousness of the testing and the tediousness of the report writing, and I just ultimately decided not to do that kind of work. and I'm happy about it. I said, again, God bless the people that do it. It's important work, and if they get good at it, they're typically rolling in a lot of money, so they're well rewarded for it. But anyway, so I'm just reminded of that right now. And one of the things that you don't get, that you do get, not all the time, but often as a therapist, is some thanks from the client. There's a chance that, one, she'll never be thanked by Jamie, or two, Jamie might hate her guts for what she's going to ultimately include in the report, right? So that's hard to deal with. Okay, so that's the end of the fourth episode. I didn't react to anything in the fourth episode. There was a lot that happened. I will tell you what happened. If you want to watch the show, I would watch it before I spoil the ending here. We are mainly following the family, the father mainly, but also the mother and the sister of Jamie. And I took some notes here. We see that the father has good and bad aspects of his personality. He is warm, but also aggressive. And the mother and daughter often have to accommodate him and his violent outbursts. But it's not over the top. It's not exaggerated. There's also a little scene in the hardware store. Someone vandalizes his van, I think in reference to Jamie. And there's a young man at the hardware store who works there who pulls the father aside and says, basically, I think pointing at, in a very subtle way, I will commend the writers in this way, that this young man is sympathetic to Jamie, even though he killed a girl. And this is absolutely a part of the incel community, that men who martyr themselves by committing murder or acts of terrorism are heroes to these people. There are examples that I can talk about, but for the sake of time, I won't get into it, in real history that have, one of the very first long episodes I ever did was about Elliot Rodger. He is a figure in this world as well. And for the incel, MGTOW, red pill, manosphere people, they very much relate to the Jamies and the Elliot Rodgers and the others that are in the news. And they're very sympathetic to them. And some of them will even say that what they did was right, because they have fully cultivized themselves into believing that they are victims as men. And of course, when you're being constantly victimized and harmed and pushed around, at some point, some of us are going to break and we're going to fight back. They see it as self-defense. They could see a scenario where a Jamie who kills a Katie in the world, depending on how it looks to them and how they're narrativizing it, they would see it as self-defense. They would see it as completely justified and a fight for good. I'm not joking. It's real. It's not every incel. It's not every MGTOW. It's not every red pill. It's not every Andrew Tate follower, but many. Certainly, at the very least, sympathy and sympathetic conversations, if not flat out support and a call to arms. So we saw a little scene with that where the worker at the hardware store was basically saying he's in that group and he supports Jamie and all that kind of stuff. And the dad's kind of rattled by that. Then Jamie calls the dad because it's the dad's birthday, and he's on speakerphone with the father and the mother and Jamie's sister. And Jamie informs his family that he is going to change his plea to that of guilty, meaning that he's ready to admit that he did in fact commit the crime of murder of Katie. And it's a bit of a relief or a bit of a change, or, the parents cry together, they grieve together, they regret together. The father particularly regrets his fatherhood of Jamie. He blames himself. It's very moving, and the acting is superb. And also the father and the mother, to some extent, express regret for letting Jamie isolate in his room and play video games. They wonder if they could have done something about it. And, we could actually have those questions and those conversations. But anyway, so that's that. And a unique show. And I appreciate that it's limited series, right? It's not like going to have a season 2. I mean, maybe it will, but it would be a completely different kid in all likelihood, right? They're not going to continue the story, and I like that. Producers of show just string shows out over years and years to try to make money. It's just like, just wrap up the story. So anyway, I appreciated that part of it. But also the uniqueness, and also the depiction of the psychological assessment was, I don't know, like maybe the best depiction of that, which isn't saying much, by the way. But it'd be hard to imagine a second place or a close second place, because of the nature of the way they're shooting this show. Is they're willing to show the boring bits, right? They're just showing an hour of time in reality, right? And that's what those things can look like, right? There's no edits, there's no melodrama. It's just, this is the way it looks. Sometimes it's boring, sometimes it's interesting, sometimes it's confusing, sometimes it's not clear what everyone is saying or thinking. It's just sort of like, they were just observing a situation. And so, I have a very short list of depictions of mental health people depicted in movies and TV that I consider to be on the up and up. If you're curious, I could really only put one or two. One is Ordinary People, which I haven't seen in like 30 years, so don't quote me on it. The other is Hope Springs, where Steve Carell actually plays a couple therapist. From my memory, that depiction was pretty good as well. There's not a lot of that, but at least he doesn't have sex with the clients. The clients are Meryl Streep and what's his name? Anyway, so I think that To some extent, Good Will Hunting is a good depiction of a particular kind of therapist, a particular kind of humanistic, in the moment, gestalty kind of therapist. But he does at some point try to strangle his client, Matt Damon. Matt Damon provokes him verbally, and Robin Williams, who is excellent in the movie, literally strangles his client. Now, could that happen? Sure, but it's like, come on. But the rest of it was, in my book, but some people think of that movie as being unethical therapy, certainly the strangling. But the rest of it, it's just a style of therapy. It's very self-disclosure based and loose and real. There's not a lot of professionalism, and it's a particular brand of therapy. And as long as you're on the up and up and you don't strangle your clients and you have an ethical professionalism boundary at some point, right, then that can be done. And really, and I haven't seen all the depictions, but I've seen many. And that's my short list. Anyway, so I would definitely add this. This isn't therapy, though. This is a psychological assessment, which is a completely different thing. But it is related. Anyway, so let me know what you think in the comments. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself. And take a breath, because this is big. And so along those lines, take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.